The theater lights dimmed, and a hush spread across the vast hall. The crowd, buzzing with excitement only moments ago, fell into a heavy silence as a small figure stepped onto the stage. An 8-year-old girl, no taller than the microphone stand, walked slowly to the center, her tiny shoes scuffing against the polished floor. Her name was Lena. She wore a simple white dress, slightly oversized, as though it had been borrowed or passed down from another child. Her hands gripped the microphone as if it were the only thing tethering her to the moment. Despite her age, her eyes carried a depth that startled the audience, eyes that had seen more sorrow than most adults could ever bear. One of the judges leaned forward, noticing her trembling. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Lena," she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the silence. "And what will you be singing for us today?" another judge inquired, smiling warmly, trying to ease the tension. Lena hesitated. She glanced down at her hands, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. Then, she looked up, her gaze steady and filled with something far beyond her years. "I'm singing the song my mama used to sing, before the war." The word struck like a thunderclap. A murmur rippled through the audience. People leaned forward, sensing the weight of her story but not yet knowing its full depth. The camera zoomed in, capturing her fragile frame and the bravery it took to stand before thousands, holding nothing but a memory and her voice. For a moment, everything was still, no sound, no movement, just anticipation hanging in the air. The judges exchanged glances, realizing this was not just another performance. This was a child standing at the edge of her pain, ready to turn it into something that could either shatter or heal her. And then, with a trembling inhale, Lena closed her eyes. The first note was about to break the silence. As Lena stood on the stage, her mind drifted back to a world that felt both close and impossibly far away. Before the war, life was simple, filled with laughter and the scent of her mother's baking bread. She remembered evenings when her father would play an old guitar, and her little brother, Sammy, would clap along offbeat, making everyone giggle. At night, her mother would tuck her in, humming the soft lullaby that later became Lena's anchor in the darkest moments. But then came the days that changed everything. The sounds of birdsong and neighbors chatting were replaced by sirens and explosions. Lena could still recall the way the ground shook beneath her feet, the sight of her mother's hands trembling as she hurried the children into the cellar. "Stay close. Don't let go," her father had said, his voice tight with fear. One night, the lullaby stopped. The guitar was silenced. And in the chaos that followed, Lena's family was torn from her forever. She remembered clutching her brother's small hand until soldiers pushed them apart, remembered calling for her parents but hearing only the roar of fire and the crash of buildings. Somehow, she survived, rescued by strangers who carried her to safety, then placed with a kind host family in a distant country. But survival came with its own weight. Her heart carried scars, invisible yet heavy. She often lay awake at night, whispering the lullaby to herself, clinging to the last thread that tied her to her lost world. Now, standing in front of judges and an audience that knew nothing of the girl behind the microphone, she felt the memories pressing on her chest. Singing wasn't just about music. It was about remembering those she loved, about giving her grief a voice when words were not enough. The crowd waited, unaware that the song they were about to hear wasn't just a performance. It was a piece of her broken childhood, a plea for peace, and a memory of everything war had stolen. The first note escaped Lena's lips like a fragile whisper carried by the wind. At first, it seemed too delicate to fill the massive theater, but within seconds, the sound grew, soft yet powerful, trembling yet unbreakable. Her voice had no polish, no trained perfection, but it had something infinitely more rare, truth. The lullaby her mother once sang wrapped around the room like an invisible embrace. It wasn't in English, but in her native tongue, yet the meaning transcended language. Each syllable carried longing, each rise and fall of her tone painted the story of a child who had lost everything but still dared to sing. The audience leaned forward as if afraid to miss a single note. A man in the front row lowered his head, wiping away tears he couldn't explain. Parents in the crowd instinctively reached for their children's hands, feeling Lena's pain ripple through them. Even the judges, so used to dazzling performances, sat stunned, their eyes glassy, their usual polished composure breaking apart. As the song swelled, Lena's small body shook, her voice quivering under the weight of memory. For a brief moment, she almost faltered, her eyes opening as if she'd seen her brother standing there, smiling the way he once had. The microphone wavered in her hands, her breath catching. But then something extraordinary happened. The hush of the room transformed into silent strength. She felt hundreds of hearts beating with hers, strangers silently willing her to go on. That energy lifted her. She inhaled, steady this time, and let the song pour from her soul with a force that seemed impossible for someone so small. The melody soared, echoing through the theater like a prayer. It was no longer just Lena singing. It was every child who had ever lost their home, every mother who had whispered comfort in the dark, every father who had prayed for safety that never came. By the final line, the theater was not just listening, they were holding their breath, completely undone by the purity of an 8-year-old song. Halfway through the song, Lena's voice trembled. The weight of her memories pressed too heavily against her chest. For an instant, the words caught in her throat. Her hands tightened on the microphone as her gaze dropped to the floor. The theater, which had been hanging on every note, now sat in a fragile silence. The little girl's lips quivered. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and for a painful moment, it seemed as if she might walk away, defeated, overwhelmed by the ghosts of her past. A murmur passed through the audience, not impatience, but concern, as though everyone wanted to rush forward and lift her back up. Then, softly at first, something unexpected began. From the darkened crowd, a single voice hummed the melody she had been singing. Another joined. And then another. Soon, the entire audience was quietly humming along, the lullaby flowing back to her like a tide of support. One of the judges leaned into the microphone, his voice gentle but firm. "Sing, Lena. We're here with you." Her head lifted. Startled, she looked out into the sea of faces, faces of strangers, but strangers who now felt like family. The trembling in her chest eased, and a new strength rose within her. She closed her eyes once more and took a steady breath. This time, when she sang, her voice rang out stronger, richer, soaring above the soft hum of the crowd. The lullaby, once just a memory of her mother, became something larger, an anthem of resilience. The theater transformed. Tears streamed down cheeks, hands clutched together, hearts opened wide. Lena was no longer singing alone, she was leading a chorus of compassion. Every note she released carried her pain into the air, where it was met, caught, and held by those who had chosen to share her burden. And when the final verse came, she did not falter. She sang it with the courage of 1,000 voices behind her, her little body trembling not with fear anymore, but with hope. The hall erupted into thunderous applause. As Lena sang her final note, the theater erupted into a standing ovation. The sound of clapping and cheers crashed like a wave, filling the room with raw emotion. People were on their feet, some crying openly, others cheering her name. The little girl who had walked onto the stage so timidly now stood in the center of a storm of love and admiration. Lena lowered the microphone, her chest rising and falling quickly. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in so long, they weren't tears of grief, they were tears of release. She looked up at the judges, unsure of what would happen next. Then it came. With a sudden movement, one of the judges slammed their palm onto the golden buzzer. The moment seemed to freeze. The audience gasped as golden confetti burst from above, cascading down like a rain of light. The sparkling pieces fell gently onto Lena's hair, her dress, her tiny shoulders, as if the universe itself was crowning her with hope. Lena's hands flew to her face, overwhelmed. She had no words, only tears streaming down her cheeks. The judge who pressed the buzzer stood, his own voice breaking as he spoke, "You didn't just sing a song. You gave us your heart. You gave us your story. And tonight, Lena, you gave the world a reason to believe again." The other judges nodded, some unable to speak through their tears. The audience roared louder, chanting her name, clapping until their hands ached. For Lena, the confetti was not just glitter, it was a symbol. A sign that even though war had taken everything, the world had given her something back. Love, connection, and the chance to dream again. As the lights shone down on her, Lena whispered softly, almost to herself, "Mama, I did it." And in that moment, a little girl who had once lost everything stood victorious, not because she won a competition, but because she reminded the world of the unbreakable strength of the human spirit.